All right, welcome everybody to today's edition of Committee for Sydney Live. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the committee. And to begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and future. While today we are meeting online and you may be somewhere else in Sydney or anywhere in the world, I am on the traditional lands of the Digigal and Gadigal people who traditionally occupied the Sydney coast. Our topic today is the future of CBDs. How do we revitalize our economic and social centers after COVID-19? This is a topic that anyone who cares about cities is thinking about a lot these days. And there are a lot of ideas and theories, prognostications and predictions that we need to sort through. I think we all implicitly understand just how important Sydney's CBD is economically and culturally. It's a space that concentrates people in a very special way, enabled by generations of investment in public transport. It's the oldest part of Sydney where European settlement began and grew out from. So it has incredibly significant historic assets and buildings and public spaces. And then of course it is the powerhouse of the economy in so many ways. And the CBD has been devastated by COVID. So the question we face is what is going to happen in the short run and in the long run. Some people are predicting that working from home will lead to a hollowing out of CBDs as people choose to live and work further away. Others predict that CBDs will come back as soon as they are allowed to, as soon as there is a vaccine or a treatment. And we just need to hold on until then. Others believe this is an opportunity to rethink the way CBDs work and maybe even make them function better in the future. So there's a lot of ideas about that. To help us sort through all of this, we have three incredible speakers. Monica Barone, CEO of the City of Sydney, Adrian Taylor, CEO of Office for Charter Hall, and Stewart White, Director of Development for Scentre Group. These are people who will be well known to many of you, major leaders in their fields. Our format today is that we'll have an opening statement from each of them. Then we will move into questions. You can all submit questions via the Q&A app on Zoom. I will do my best to sort through them, and we should have a great discussion. I should say that we are in the blackout period for Scentre Group before results, so there may be certain topics that cannot be spoken to directly, but that should not hinder us. So with that, Monica, can I bring you in to start us off?
Thanks, Gabriel, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this really important conversation. Now, for those of you that know me, you know that I'm rarely lost for words, but I have to say with all sincerity that the question, what is the future of our CBDs, does perplex me. The reason I find it perplexing and even confronting is that for most of my adult and professional life, I've devoted myself to addressing the global challenge arising from the migration of populations towards cities. Through my work at the City of Sydney and through participation in global networks like C40 and Resilient Cities, my focus has been on finding ways to design and manage cities whilst achieving social, cultural and economic justice and environmental responsibility. In short, finding ways to reconcile density with livability and fairness, thus building resilient cities. Everything that I've studied and learned and transitioned into policy planning and action is predicated on the opportunities that derive from people living and working in close proximity to each other. And then along comes a shock event that can't coexist with density, a pandemic, where the risk is infection and the mitigation measure is physical distancing, flying in the face of everything that I know about how to plan and manage cities. So today I'm going to share with you a few reflections on this question, but like everyone at this time, I reserve the right to change my mind as new information comes in. Most of us are still speculating, but in time, information will come in following the many studies currently underway into workplace culture and productivity, the impacts of isolation on our well-being, and on the productivity of our cities and the nation. So I'm just going to say a few words on 3 points. Firstly, I think when it's safe to come in, we will come back into CBDs. As we've seen, every time physical restrictions are lifted, people flock to be together, much to the chagrin of the Premier. If we were good at staying away from each other and living in isolation, we wouldn't be facing a second wave. But will it be enough to save our CBDs and return them to the same levels of activity? I don't know. But will we come back to the office? We have a workforce of over 2,000 at the City of Sydney. Definitely people who can work from home are enjoying the flexibility, but they're starting to report missing the routine and social interaction of the office. At an executive level, we are very concerned about maintaining the culture of the organisation while so many people are working remotely. We are monitoring productivity closely. Some areas are possibly more productive, some are not. We are very mindful of the risks, particularly the probity, fraud and corruption risks. Our current position is that post-pandemic, we will have a hybrid model with more work from home, but we will be maintaining our office at current levels. Secondly, I suspect that many of you, like me, have learned a lot more about your business as a consequence of the pandemic. We've all had to interrogate every aspect of our budgets and every business process. Our strengths and weaknesses at the City of Sydney have become clearer to me. Similarly, the strengths and weaknesses of our city have become more pronounced. The socially unjust distribution of jobs, housing and transport infrastructure is more apparent than ever. If you live a walk, a bike ride, or no more than 30-minute train trip from work, then you're more likely to feel comfortable coming into the CBD. The regional plan that aims for a multi-centre 30-minute city is one way to build resilience into our city. It supports resilience against a number of shock events, not just pandemics. So my second point is that we should use this event to strengthen our commitment to implementing the regional plan. Finally, the strengths and weaknesses in the resilience and diversity of our economy has also become more apparent. I am proud of this country's health response and very grateful to live in a country with a universal healthcare system. But I am disappointed in our economic response. I'm not talking about the alleviation of hardship through payment support. I am talking about the absence of a robust economic plan. Industrial relations and tax reform is not an economic recovery plan. They are simply inputs that should be designed in response to a plan. Where's the plan? If there was ever a need for a national cabinet on innovation, the time is now. Our universities are being decimated. All that physical infrastructure and intellectual capital should be immediately put to work. For example, in the City of Sydney area, we have brilliant medical and biotech research and facilities, but they are short of lab space and equipment. Is that surplus teaching space being converted? Is the research being invested in? We cannot rely on the old playbook, which sees us pouring stimulus money largely into physical infrastructure. We need to invest in our knowledge-based jobs too. And all of these jobs will be housed in our universities and in the innovation precincts that are proximate to our CBDs. Thanks, Gabriel.
Okay, thank you, Monica, very much. Adrian, why don't we bring you in next?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I guess as a practitioner and one of the largest owners of office accommodation, we're very motivated and interested in what our tenant customers are telling us about what's important to them and what it takes to bring them back to their office. And I wanted to cover off 4 things briefly, and the first one is just what they've told us. So we surveyed in May over 300 of our tenant customers, and over 70% of them said to us in May that it was their intention to return to the office through June and July. About 30% of those said that they expected to be around sort of half their capacity, and a quarter said they expected to be at full capacity, and the balance would sort of be on I guess, a staggered basis. They told us that the key drivers, firstly, was schooling. We know it can be very challenging managing homeschooling and our professional lives together, but I guess from the vast majority of term 2, Sydney and New South Wales schools were back in classroom teaching. And then, of course, transport was a really significant barrier and driver to help encourage people to come back into the cities. And the first one was public transport, and I think our Premier and our Minister for Transport in New South Wales made us some significant announcements in late June, which came into effect from the start of July, more than doubling the capacity in the major forms of transport into our CBDs. Our tenant customers said that they wanted to ride bikes, and as Monica was saying, that's it's another form of transport which is increasingly popular in Sydney. So a lot of building owners, including ourselves, have reopened our end-of-trip facilities and changed our regimes in that regard. And then some want to drive, and the car parking operators have put on special rates and discounted rates to help those people as well. So when we look at what some of those drivers were and then the responses, most of those barriers have been addressed in one way or another, and certainly moving towards what the tenant customers want. So if I move from what they said to what have they actually done, we've been in constant dialogue and discussions, and we're monitoring on a weekly basis at an organisational level what their return to the office take-ups have been. And I'll just branch out from Sydney to around the country for a moment, but if we look at the ACT or Perth, for example, we have around 80% of our tenant customers that have returned to the office, not necessarily in a full capacity, but in some capacity, quite a range of levels. In Brisbane, the measures is around 44-45% of our tenant customers are back in the office to some degree. Sydney is in the low 20% level. So in spite of having a reasonably extended period and setting aside the current re-emergences of some clusters around New South Wales, having had a period of quite a number of weeks of virtually zero community transmission, and in spite of what they were saying back in mid to late May, it's surprising to me to think that only just over 20% of organisations have come back at all. And in Melbourne, for more obvious reasons, that number is probably around 13 or 14%. There are some other reasons for that. I mean, some of the offshore domiciled organisations have been are effectively governed or led by policies which are developed in the Northern Hemisphere. So I do see opportunities for some of those organisations. If I was a leader of an Australian leader of one of those organisations, I think there's a real opportunity when the health environment permits to say, hey, let us trial and test our return to work plans in Australia and learn in an agile manner and feed that back into our plan, as we will inevitably be doing the same in our Northern Hemisphere and our other organisations. But it has confused me to some degree that I see this sort of growing divergence between what people are doing in their personal lives versus what they're doing in their professional lives. And when I think about a lot of family members who will kiss and hug their children before school and when they return from school, and who will be somewhat in scrums at the supermarkets, queuing up and at the aisles and at the checkouts as they're getting their groceries, and then who are you can see them, the cafes around the suburbs are pretty much heaving, and some of them are doing better than they've ever done before. When I look at those people who can get the restaurant bookings or a booking in a pub and be served at a table, if you're not organised a week in advance, pretty much in a 15+ radius of the Sydney CBD, you can't even get a table. So they're conducting and engaging in all those sorts of activities, and yet when the suggestion is, why don't you, on a safe and measured and planned basis, come back into the CBD, there's this sort of reaction, I couldn't go back into the CBD. And it's, to me, there's a real dichotomy between those two views. Just moving on briefly, what have owners done? What have leading owners done? Look, there's been a whole raft of preparedness across building access, things around entrances, signage, lifts, concierge facilities, contractor management. Another categories across the building amenities, so what's being done in lobbies. I mentioned before the building end of trip changing facilities, preparing the retailers, the cafes, the food and beverage. It's been a whole range of initiatives on services and technology, frictionless and touchless entry in some cases, various initiatives in relation to air conditioning, activating technology and apps to facilitate sort of frictionless services to buildings, and a whole range of other initiatives. And effectively, we've given all of our tenants, as of a couple of months ago, guidance on how to return back to the office and helping them with the planning and so on. So I think my time's just about up, but I think that there's been quite a lot of misinformation in the media. Stories that you could wait 40 minutes, an hour to get into a lift. There haven't been any waits whatsoever. I've been back in the CBD for over 2 months now. Concerns around public transport, which again, I think that have been well addressed. Concerns about not being able to get food. And again, a lot of the retailers, and I'm sure Stewart will touch on this, but they've really done a terrific job, in my view, of preparing their premises for safe trade and servicing their customers. Again, not being able to ride bikes has been addressed by reopening end of trip. So I think a lot of the barriers have been removed, and of course we need to be concerned and aware and alert to the health risks, and they can move with time. But I'd like to hear later on from people out there around what their residual concerns are, because to me there's that dichotomy between the way that the city has been prepared to welcome back with open arms the office customers, as opposed to the response in Sydney to date.
Thank you, Adrian. All right, Stewart, over to you.
Thanks, Gabriel. I think we all concur with Gabriel that Sydney CBD is a major contributor to the state's economy. So we all need to work with local and state government, employers and cultural institutions to support a safe and gradual return of people to the CBD. The CBD is an ecosystem of many businesses, large and small, and retail is a core component that contributes to its attraction and vibrancy as a destination, as well as its economic strength. CBD retail sales have essentially doubled in the last decade, reflecting a world-class offer that didn't previously exist. The development of Westfield Sydney has been a catalyst of this growth, increasing sales from around $600 million to about $1.275 billion in the same period, and prompted other retail development in the CBD since. Retail in Sydney CBD was definitely impacted by COVID restrictions, but differently to retail centres in our Sydney suburbs. But despite the restrictions, all of our Westfield centres, including Westfield Sydney, have remained open throughout the pandemic. Restrictions on certain categories of retail through April and part of May have had the largest impact on CBD businesses, as workers and broader the community have been required to stay at home for everything other than essentials. Sydney CBD workers represent significant customers during the week, and the weekday customers recovered to the same extent as the weekends. doesn't serve the same residential population as our residential centres benefit from the rush on supermarkets and other essential retailers. Retail in CBD has taken a bit longer to recover. However, we saw customer visitation almost immediately lift when restrictions started to ease, demonstrating how retail as an experience and destination is part of our everyday life. The growth of luxury in Sydney CBD, however, has differentiated the CBD offer from suburban centres, and it's the outperforming category for Westfield Sydney. Since opening in 2010, Westfield Sydney has tripled the number of retail brands from 11 to 38. We've been constantly changing the mix of luxury and other retailers and lead the way in bringing first-to-market international retailers to Sydney. Approximately 80% of the sales from this category are to Australian residents, which is evident with luxury stores reporting a strong recovery in sales. Sydney CBD retail has definitely been impacted, but it's on its way back. Customers are telling us they feel more comfortable with the safety and hygiene measures we put in place in our centres, and category restrictions have started to ease, which has seen visitation steadily increase. We're all very much aware of COVID safety protocols in running our business, as I'm sure everyone on this call is, particularly now. So what do we need to do to bring people back into the city and support retail businesses? Well, we all need to lead by example in how we live and work within a COVID-safe economy, and just keep inching forward to support a safe economic activity within government and health advice. We should be encouraging businesses to make a gradual return to working in their offices with COVID-safe protocols. And we know that the New South Wales government has put a system in to register COVID-safe businesses, and every business needs to have a COVID-safe plan. I think confidence in the safety of using public transport, but there are tools in place to help people plan and stagger their arrival and departure times from work. I think we need to be more creative and innovative in how we reintroduce COVID-safe special events in the CBD. We need to live and work around these conditions. We should also capitalise on local tourism, focusing on those from within our city, the remainder of the state, and other states that can't travel internationally, given the restrictions on us for the foreseeable future. But the future vision of Sydney definitely includes more retail, and Sydney CBD retail post-COVID will remain strong. As retailers continue to build the relationships with their customers, Sydney CBD will remain the location of choice for flagship stores that offer new and exciting experiences. We'll continue to cater for luxury retailers' demand for additional space through the extension of Westfield Sydney by converting the old DJ's menswear store on the corner of Castlereagh and Market Streets to 5 levels of new and exciting stores. The extension of Westfield Sydney will reinforce Castlereagh Street as that home of luxury in Sydney. We'll also be delivering the final stage of the Barangaroo precinct with our partners Aquilan. Called Barangaroo Central, it'll be a unique mixed-use site that'll include a variety of retail and hospitality offers that will complement the Crown Complex and become the local centre for all the CBD, Millers Point, Rocks and Barangaroo residents. The project will deliver 3 hectares of activated community space and parkland on the Sydney foreshore. Sitting next to the Barangaroo metro station and within a short walking distance of the CBD, it'll become a new place for the broader Sydney community to enjoy the city and become a focal point for new special events and festivals. The CBD and all it has to offer will only become more accessible with the recently completed light rail and obviously the extension of the metro, making it easier for more Sydney-siders to come in and access the city and enjoy the retail. Thanks, Gabriel. Back to you.
All right. Thanks, all of you. I think that sets up the rest of this conversation very well. Everybody feel free to submit questions via the Q&A app. Let me start with one of the biggest questions that I think everybody is trying to sort through is what is going to happen with working from home? The conventional wisdom is there will be a hybrid model. Everybody says that there will be a hybrid model. And I suppose it really matters what is the nature of that hybrid model. Just how much less will people be coming into the CBD in this hybrid model? It's one thing to say from the perspective of being the owner of office space, it's okay, companies will still be paying the rent. But from the perspective of the vitality of the CBD, if the number of human beings coming in is less each day, that would certainly change the way CBDs function. So what are your thoughts about what we are most likely to see in terms of the trend of work from home? I guess maybe I'll put that to all three of you. Let's do that in reverse order. Stewart, starting with you.
Yeah, that's a tricky one to really sort of look ahead and see how quickly people will return to work. And I think, as Adrian said, there's a lot of this has been dictated by some of the offshore companies' policies of not returning to work till maybe next year even. So I've heard a lot of that sort of talk. Obviously, and selfishly from our point of view, we would like people to come into the city as soon as possible. We'd like a return of work as soon as possible. We think it's great for the economy. We even think it's great for our business. I mean, here at Scentre Group, we've encouraged our staff to come back because, you know, I think we just work better socially in the office, and, you know, bouncing ideas off each other on how to deal with this crisis, in our minds, works a lot better face to face. But having said that, in the event that it doesn't go back to, you know, working from the office, I do agree that maybe some people will end up having a hybrid sort of scenario where they will work a couple of days a week from the office and maybe a couple of days a week from home. And we've spoken to a lot of space users about potentially using some of our shopping centres to be able to set up a satellite office where some of their staff that feel socially isolated by working at home can come in and work in some sort of flex environment, office environment where, you know, they can meet with team members or a group of fellow colleagues and actually have that social interaction. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to just see how it all plays out.
Adrian, what do you think is likely to happen with the longer term trend about working from home?
I had this moment last week where I had a little gap between meetings, and we've got around half our people in at the moment. And in the space of 45 minutes, I had 7 different conversations with people. I was able to keep a couple of things moving, answer a couple of questions, give somebody some encouragement, and so on. And I was reflecting on the difference between that moment versus, and I've, you know, like everybody else, I've spent plenty of time working from home lately as well. And it was absolutely chalk and cheese. And I think there's some, I guess there's mixed messages at the moment, but there's quite a lot of confusion between short-term implications of working from home versus what are the longer-term trends going to be. And I know the question is really around, well, what do I think is going to happen over the longer term? I've got no doubt that leading organisations have been using flexible working practices for, you know, at least the last decade. We certainly have been, and I know most of our, you know, most of our leading customers have in any event. So flexible working, I absolutely think will be a thing of the future, and it's not necessarily something that's new. I suppose the question is, does the composition change? And how much does it change? And I think that there'll be an ecosystem, if you like, for organisations that work successfully that is still centred with, you know, a well laid out and designed office hub, if you like, but which is equally supported by measures of working from home. If you're a professional services or consulting business, probably working in the client's office. We regularly have consultants and people that we collaborate with that we invite into our space in a steady environment to make sure that they're part of you know, the DNA of what we're creating. And potentially working in third spaces could be part of that ecosystem as well. And again, if you think of leading office owners creating more spaces which are shared within buildings, shared with the other occupiers within the building and those in the local community surrounding the buildings. Australians are probably leading the way in creating those spaces which are available for that sort of collaboration. So I think there'll be an ecosystem. I think it will certainly involve flexible working, but I definitely think the office will continue to play a key part of that. I think we're seeing increasing. I think when we first started talking about working from home, there was a lot of somewhat surprised by some organisations saying, "Wow, we can do a lot more from home than we realised, and we can be more productive than perhaps we thought we could." And I think to some degree that's absolutely been the case for some organisations. I think now we're starting to see some of the cracks emerging. If you look at the Black Dog Institute and other groups that work with mental health, you're seeing an emergence of more and more issues from people that have been in lockdowns for extended periods of time. So I think there are concerns with extended periods of work from home only. So yeah, again, I'll come back to that ecosystem is where I think we'll get.
Monica, what do you think is likely to happen?
So firstly, I just wanted to say, and I neglected to say, that the city does have a community recovery plan, which is very focused on how we support the economic and social recovery of the city, including some of the things that Stewart and Adrian talked about, about in time, increasing the activations and other things to bring people back into the CBD in safe ways. And also we are encouraging our staff to come in a very safe way, not just because of the culture of the organisation, but also as a part of their duty to the CBD to make sure that they shop and do things in the CBD and inspire confidence. So I think that, as businesses who are concerned about, or organisations or governments that are concerned about the city, we have to also practice what we preach. But in terms of the work from home, look, I obviously agree. I think we're going to be going to more of a hybrid model. I think that, many organisations were already doing that and more people have become familiar with that. What will that mean for the CBD? Well, it's interesting because, of course, we don't have everything in front of us yet. We know in normal times what the jobs growth would have been in the CBD, right? We don't know whether that jobs growth trajectory, what's going to happen to that now without immigration and other things. So let's just stand that aside. But assuming we get to a point where that jobs growth is, occurring, assuming that we get to a point where you can start to hot desk a bit more because you can actually ensure the physical safety of people, right? I think possibly what happened, and I guess we're all speculating here, is that people will use their facilities, their buildings a lot more efficiently. So they'll get more efficiency out of their real estate because and they will accommodate that jobs growth into the existing real estate, which will mean slower renewal of the CBD infrastructure and real estate. That's got challenges. I mean, it's got good environmental results because you're not recycling buildings, so much, but it's got challenges in terms of course, that recycling and renewal of those buildings, what keeps the city fresh, and what also creates jobs. So I think that's possible. I mean, we've seen over the years with our floor space census, over the years, the reduction in the amount of space per employee. People used to have many more square meters per employee in their office space, and over the years they've reduced that to get more efficiency out of their real estate. So I think that will happen. But that's why I go back to the fact that, given the importance of the CBD and given the level of CBD infrastructure that we've already invested in, all of that legacy infrastructure that is CBD infrastructure, we can't afford not for CBDs to be job centres, which is why we have to look at those other jobs that do require being together, right? You can't really have your lab at home, right? If you're a biotech, startup or developer, if you're in medical research, if you're in many of those sorts of businesses, which are the future, which should be a big part of our future and are very much concentrated in the innovation and collaboration area around the CBD, Haymarket, University of Sydney. Those areas are got a lot more potential now, and we've certainly been doing the studies in order to start to talk about this a lot more publicly, for jobs growth. And they are the kinds of people that need to be in the city. They need to work together, and they need to be in, proximity to universities. They are part of universities, and they will bring people into the city and into the CBD. And my final point is, from talking to my colleagues in universities, the students are going crazy. Students want to be with other young people. They do not want to be at home studying, right? So as soon as it is safe, so that's why I'm saying, in order to save the CBD, we need to look at the areas of the economy we should grow in and invest in, because they're going to keep the CBD vital. Of course, that's after we can ensure people's health safety. Thanks, Gabriel.
Okay. What would you all say? How would you respond to people who suggest that CBDs are actually not all that essential for a modern economy? Pointing, I would say, to maybe some of the European capitals, which don't really have CBDs in terms of such a large concentration of jobs in one place, and they seem to be doing okay economically. How do you answer that? Monica?
Look, as I said in my opening remarks, I have been, grown up and schooled in the, the theory of, it's clusters and agglomerations that create innovation and jobs, right? So my whole career has been about that. So that is a challenge for me, because of course we've just completely designed the city plan around enabling that, right? Enabling the jobs growth with the livability and the environmental sustainability, right? So it's always been about trying to find the nexus between all of those things to enable all those things to happen. So I find that extremely challenging. And so I can't really answer that. I'm not sure that it's an either or. I think we will always have job centres and we will have CBDs, but I do think that we will move to the multi-centred, city. That's in the plan. It's been in the plan for decades, really. It's finally just being really starting to be seriously implemented, because that creates the social and justice, because you don't have some people who've got a short trip to work and others who are 2 hours on a train, right, or more. And you also provide these kinds of resilient cells that can sort of ring fence themselves in times of crisis like this. And so, I think that when you think about it through the lens of resilience and social sort of and economic justice, I think that move towards that is going to be the transition plan. It's the transition plan we have. That's all I can really offer on that, Gabriel.
Yeah. Adrian or Stewart, do you want to take that? Wouldn't we be okay if we don't have CBDs? Why do we need them anyway?
Well, I think looking back in time, the suburbs were quite strong in terms of, retail centres in the suburbs were quite strong. And that's only because there was a void within Sydney CBD. No one on the weekends came into the city to shop. Obviously, over time, we've corrected that and we've changed that, and the CBD has overtaken the suburbs and the regional retail centres, and all the best retail offer is now in the CBD. And what's better is that we now have the public transport for people to be able to access that. And then put on top of that, the nightlife and the night economy has also grown. Whilst, during COVID, that's been temporarily restricted or stopped. I think once we get over COVID, I think that will return back to normal. And I think people will reinvest in the city, and I think there'll be more, cultural events and social events that will be focusing back into the city. So, I'm quite firm that the CBD will be stronger than ever in the future.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the people I meet in Sydney aren't from Sydney, and most people don't say I choose to live in one of the greatest suburbs in the world. They say they want to live in one of the best cities in the world. That's the way we talk, right? And so what do cities do? I mean, they bring people together, they bring capital together, they bring ideas together. They bring employment opportunities. They bring idea generation and ideation. They bring activities and events. They bring retailing, and they bring business and growth opportunities. And those things have, all those activities are possible to varying degrees on a digital or a distance basis, but they don't work the same way as when people come together. And that's just the natural way that people communicate and good things happen. And I'm maybe a bit like Monica, not quite sure how to answer the question.
Yeah, no, good, very eloquent, very eloquent. All right, a couple of questions have come in about business events. We have been pretty big advocates for trying to figure out how to restart business events, working with the ICC and with Business Events Sydney. It's a big part of the magic of the agglomeration is bringing people. It's not just where you go to work every day. It's enabling those kinds of meetings. What can we be doing to accelerate the reopening of business events? Any thought on that? Adrian?
Look, I think it is hard. We all know it's hard at the moment. I think we're in a period of transition at the moment, and if we sort of go back to hybrid models, I think again, following all the appropriate safety and distancing and measures which we're all becoming very familiar with, there is the ability to host hybrid events where you have a certain number of people live and you bring other people in virtually, and we're all getting very used to that and very good at that. So I guess, Gabe, the answer is, on a gently approach. But it does add something to an event when there are some people with that spark and that being able to roll off the body language of the other people. You're seeing look at the artists and the musicians and people that are starting to do a few things where, you'll have a very small, a small group together and then bring a whole lot of other people in virtually. So I think those are the sorts of measures that you start to do on a gentle basis and on a cautious basis, and you grow from there.
If I may, Gabriel?
Yeah.
I think one of the things we need to think about is how we're going to differentiate ourselves post-COVID if we want to keep attracting business events, right? Because even before COVID, the whole challenge of flight shaming and other things was starting to impact business events, right? So we know business events are really significant to our economy, to our Sydney economy, right? So to lose that, like losing international students, that's having a huge impact. So the things we're doing at the City of Sydney around this, and we were doing before COVID, and that the roundtables we've been having to discuss with the community about what they want to see us focus on, have continued to reinforce the same messages. We need to make sure that what we offer is, we need to offer something distinct, right? So one of the partnerships that we have at the City of Sydney, of course, is Sustainable Destination, and that's the partnership that has all the the major hotels, the convention centre, the fish market, the opera house, all of it's called Sustainable Destination. It's about the parties that are the recipients of the people who offer and support those sorts of business events. And they've clearly understood that if we can, if it's going to have a significant environmental impact to get to Australia, then at least when you're here, you should be able to say, I had the greenest visit ever. Mm-hmm. Australia offered me the greenest visit ever because my hotel is properly rated, my convention centre is, and so forth, right? So we have to do that work around what it is that we have to offer so that when the time comes, we stand out. Obviously, if we can control the virus, we stand out. But one of the things I don't know the answer to is, is flying going to become prohibitive? Is it, right, there going to be so little of it that it's going to be really expensive? Or is it going to be the opposite, that in order to get it going, it's going to be really cheap? And I really don't know, and have actually read nothing on that.
Right. There's a whole analogous but different debate happening about the future of aviation. And some people, a lot of people in fact, predicting that business travel is likely to be less than it was, even though personal travel might come back as soon as people are allowed. That would have a huge impact on Sydney, wouldn't it, if that turns out to be true? Changing gears, a question about masks. More and more cities, countries are requiring masks in public or in indoor spaces. Now Victoria as well. Some people, and I guess I will put myself as one of these, believe that would accelerate the bringing back of the CBD, because you could increase the load factors on public transport safely, and you could get people in bigger groups with lower transmission rates. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not a medical practitioner, but I'll have a quick stab at it. So I read a great article probably a couple of months ago now, and it was written by a doctor at Mass General Hospital in Boston. And I think, if I've got my numbers, it's a huge hospital. I think they've got something like 20,000 staff. And they were right in the middle of infection central, if you like, on the east coast of the US. And what he said was, a combination of 5 things meant that throughout the most sort of acute attack of virus spread, meant they only had literally a handful of inter-hospital spread between infected patients and staff, or from staff then transferring it on to patients that were in the hospital for a non-COVID related reason. The 4 things were scanning. So either heat scanning, or at the very least an app where you say, yes, I'm feeling okay today, and so on and so on. So number 1 was scanning. Number 2, social distancing. Number 3, all the usual hygiene, hand washing. And number 4 was masks. So that was a very large scale example of where, if all 4 of those measures were taken as a collective, they effectively, you could almost say, eliminated the spread in what's otherwise a highly contagious environment. And the 5th thing, which sort of wrapped around all of that, was actually culture. So that culture of, instead of somebody thinking that they weren't sure if they were quite okay to go to work or not, instead of the old "you'll be right, off you go," which might be the Aussie way, and not just Australian way, to say, hey, I'm going to protect people today, and I'm going to stay at home because maybe I'm coming down with something. So my point, long-winded answer, but my point was, there was I think a very live and relevant case of the mask being a part of it's the overall protection sequence. And I think everybody knows, but with the mask, it's not about, it's about you protecting others as opposed to protecting yourself, if that makes sense. So the whole point of the mask is, if you cough, you're not infecting others.
Yep. All right. Should the CBD be different? Should it change from the way it was in the post-COVID world, or should it try to just get back to how it was? Is there anything either to prepare for future pandemics? I mean, certainly Beck Dawson, who works for Monica in running the city's resilience program, predicted pandemics long before this. So did other people who think about resilience. So some people believe this is likely to be repeated at some regular intervals. So should anything change to allow the CBD to be more resilient in the face of future pandemics? Or should anything change simply to make the CBD better than it was? Any thoughts on that? Maybe start with you on that, Monica.
So the Sydney Resilience Plan, of course, has all of the anticipated shocks and stresses. City of Sydney's had a pandemic plan for 9 years. So, I mean, of course, pandemic planning should be part of anyone's business continuity planning. I think, though, you know, it's been 100 years since we've actually had one that's, you know, well, a pandemic is global, right? And so really understanding the economic impacts was something that was, you know, none of us, I think, really grasped. Should the city be different? It should be different anyway, and those differences that have been coming and will continue to come just makes it a better CBD, but it also does, again, it does build resilience. So yes, the city should be, you know, that should be much more a city for walking and much more a city for cycling. So, you know, the plans that the city's had over the years that led first to the light rail. We're now moving on to the next. In fact, my webinar after this is with the businesses along George Street who are attending to talk about the next phase of the pedestrianisation of George Street at the southern end. So that's another $34 million project to increase the pedestrianisation of the George Street area and into the Haymarket area. The new, you know, the pop-up cycleways are in place now, and hopefully, you know, with what we learned from this, government will give us the opportunity to further deliver more cycleways that link into the CBD and across our local government area. We had to put off our Sustainable Sydney 2050 plan. It was ready to be launched, but of course COVID came along, so we've delayed it and we're obviously adapting it. But the 2050 plan has, and we'll be sharing it with everyone soon, the next big ideas in terms of, you know, the closing of more streets, the greening of more streets, you know, I think things like seeing Pitt Street Mall extended, those sorts of things. So there are, you know, these are things to be consulted with the community, but we already have all the drawings and plans and suggestions, you know, to have that conversation with the CBD community and the broader community about how we do the next phase of those works. And all of those things will make the city better, you know, pandemic or no pandemic. And they're all things that the citizens of Sydney has asked for. The final thing that we're talking a lot about isn't the physical things about making the city better, but one of the concepts that we're doing a lot of work on, and it's not converted into policy, of course, is this whole notion of community wealth building. So it's around the idea, you know, of really working much more closely with all of the major institutions and businesses in the city, not to be protectionist, but to really understand, you know, more deeply how our own purchasing and behaviours can contribute to the vitality and strength of the community, and how we can, you know, continue to ensure the diverse ownership of assets and resources, and, you know, so that the economy also is increasingly resilient. Thanks, Gabriel.
Adrian, any thoughts on this question? Should anything be different about the CBD?
Yeah, look, I think if we're sort of taking a medium-term perspective, probably just the two areas I'd hone in on would be open spaces and open places, and I think we're increasingly working on that, but I'm sure Monica will agree we've got further to go in that regard. Having public areas which are attractive and which are activated in all sorts of different ways on a regular basis, reasons for people to want to enjoy the CBD. We're involved in a key owner and other stakeholder group, for example, in relation to Martin Place. The city's increasingly been doing more things with Martin Place, but I think an area like that we could do a whole lot more if we all got together and work together. So that would be, and you know, in the very core of the CBD, that would be just, and I won't go into more detail, but you know, something that's the sort of project which I think is in the interests of people in you know, Sydney over the longer term. And the other one, I guess, is just the continuation of transport and making transport as easy as possible. And I'm not trying to be provocative, but we need to strike balances between public transport, pedestrians, cycling, and also cars. And I know, you know, there are various views on that, but you know, Sydney has quite an interesting perspective because we have quite an even distribution relative to some cities of all those forms of transport being quite activated. It's not all one way or all the other way. But we still, within that, do need to make sure that cars and taxis can get around the CBD, because if I think of the best cities in the world, if you need to do a short trip, if you're mobility impaired, you still need to be able to move and do that short trip. So we just need to be careful that we're balancing those competing measures. But I think free transport in the CBD would be terrific. You know, that's a big one to bite off, but Melbourne do it better than Sydney at the moment, and you know, we could possibly learn a couple of things. But for ourselves and for our visitors into the CBDs, that would be another area. We've certainly been working on the infrastructure. Now, perhaps the pricing model would be something that would be great to attack one day. But there's a couple of ideas.
Yeah, good. Stewart, anything you think should be different?
Well, I agree. I mean, the city needs to be more walkable. And obviously, you know, bike riding is definitely something that the council's obviously thought about, putting in more bike lanes. And building owners are going to have to put in more end-of-trip facilities and those sort of things. So I think, look, we're already thinking about those. But I think in terms of architecture and those sort of things, you know, we're an adaptive society where we think of, you know, how our behaviours change and our habits change because of COVID, and some great architects and great thinkers along the way will come up with new things and technical things that will address some of those concerns over time. So I think it'll just evolve as well. And I definitely agree in terms of open space. And, you know, Barangaroo is, I think, probably a test case for us as a company to make sure we get that right.
Okay, final lightning round. What would you like to see from government that would most be helpful for the CBD coming back stronger than ever? Monica.
So I'd like to see, and it's something that we're working very hard on, much more engagement with the government around the innovation precinct and the collaboration area with the universities, the hospital, and all of the tech and biomedical and other groups there. So that's a work in progress. There's a lot of good things happening, including the Premier's announcement of the Atlassian, you know, the precinct that Atlassian will be in, but there's so much more that can happen there, and we're definitely working on that. And one day look forward to sharing it with you and your members, Gabrielle.
Great. Adrian, what would help from government?
Look, I guess the government's got to strike the balance at the moment between looking after safety and then stimulating economic activity and economic recovery. So with regards to when it is safe, I think the government have a really important role to play in the messaging of encouraging people to get back to their to the CBDs and to their work environments. That would probably, and you know, I think that messaging it needs to change, but obviously it will have a lens for what's happening in relation to spread of the virus in the communities.
Yeah, Stewart.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Anything the government can do to allay those safety concerns, but also on the other hand, you know, create events and work with businesses to create events and points of difference so that people feel compelled to come into the city as opposed to the other alternatives they might have. I just think there's a collaboration there that needs to happen to basically plan that out over the next 6 to 9 months before things return to normal.
All right. I want to thank all three of you for taking time today and for being so thoughtful about this. Yeah, it makes me feel like we're in good hands for the future of the CBD. And we will look forward to working with all of you on this. I want to thank all of you who joined today. We had several hundred people on this session, so clearly a lot of interest. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next edition of Committee for Sydney Live.
Thanks.